Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday, June 16th. We're almost through another full week of episodes for the Locked On Penguins podcast. For today's episode, we're going to continue the season reviews, the player grades at least. We'll get to John Marino today as we continue our rank through the defensive core, talk about how he did this season, especially in the playoffs, what the team should do with him over the offseason. Should they use him as trade bait? Should they keep him? And if they do keep him, what do I expect from him next season? We're also going to do a little bit of the Stanley Cup final from Wednesday night, and look at a certain article that Josh Yohe from The Athletic wrote today about Jack Johnson. And yes, probably for the first time in 2-3 years. Well, I shouldn't say that. Probably for the first time in well over a year, we are going to have a segment dedicated to him, and just some thoughts overall from that article, and just it's Penguins related, and it was a very interesting read with how Josh was talking about the signing, the infamous signing, of course, that was. And I also have a couple other things for the last segment for the show. So that's all coming up right after this drop.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, happy Thursday. Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am your host, Hunter Hodes. Remember to follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. You can also follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. And of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen of the day. So let's jump right into this episode, and we'll get to our season review of John Marino. So another season in the books for him. He's officially starting his massive long-term commitment to this team when Jim Rutherford signed him to that. He was at that 6-year term, $4.4 million per. And, so far hasn't lived up to it yet. This season, I thought overall, he was good defensively. And, he's been like that, throughout his career. This season, when he's on the ice, the Penguins had close to 52% of the shot attempts, break even in goals for, scoring chances, 51.4% for the Penguins when he was on the ice. High danger chances, 52.2% of those. That's the best he's had since 2019-20. Actual high danger goals for, 26, 27 against. So right around 50-50 for that. In my opinion, he was better this season than he was last year. Even strength offense, though, that's the big thing where he's kind of a black hole for me. If you go on hockeyviz.com with Micah Blake McCurdy's stuff, and you subscribe to him, and I can't recommend his site enough to anyone that wants to, dive into analytics a little more and just to see them as a useful tool to help evaluating a player. Even strength offense for Marino, minus 0.29 expected goals for per 60 when he was on the ice. If you look in front of the net, it is a blue hole, which is bad. You want all of that area to be red, which means you're generating more chances than the average player. This is well below average than the average player. The only part that's red in the offensive zone is right outside the dots, like about maybe 20, 25 feet outside the net, a little bit of red to the left side of the point. Otherwise, it's a black hole. Now, defensively, again, he was strength defense, minus 0.1 expected goals against. Not a lot of red, honestly, in the defensive zone. It's mostly just there's a lot of blue there, and that's what you want defensively. That means that he's not giving up a lot of scoring chances and shot attempts against that could lead to goals. He's doing his job with Marcus Pettersson, and I think that's probably one of the more underrated pairings league-wide. I think him and Pettersson are so great together. They suppress shots at a very high level. And if both are on the team next year, I'll be really curious to see how they can continue to, go off of what they did this year. Penalty kill, he doesn't usually take a lot of penalties, but he does kill penalties on this team. And, the only main chances for the opposition in the zone, center point right there. Nothing in front of the net, nothing at the two dots, nothing even 15 to 20 feet out. He does a very nice job of clearing the net there. Power play, not really too much there, to say the least. But yeah, I mean, this is this is who Marino is at this point in his career. Is he elite defensively? Yes, you know what you're going to get from him with that. Offensively, though, it's a work in progress. I'm sorry to say. I mean, well, I really shouldn't even say a work in progress. I mean, it's year 3 now, and his offense got worse this year. I mean, he only had 1 goal, and I'm pretty sure that came in October or November of the season. The fact that I can't even remember that goal off the top of my head just goes to show how limited he was offensively this year, and how that's probably going to be moving forward. I remember after his rookie year, which was so promising. I mean, he was probably going to get some Calder Trophy consideration if he did not break his cheekbone. I believe that came with only, I want to say that was about a month and a half left in the season, and he was generating quite a bit of buzz. I mean, I was potentially, if I had a vote, I was potentially going to put him on my ballot, but gets the injury, misses most of the end of the regular season, comes back for the last week or two, plays well, but, it's just that kind of injury is such a killer because, other players were able to step up and they were able to do their job a bit better and just in the time because Marino was not playing. Second season goes down a little bit, not himself. I think that's partly due to playing with Mike Matheson a lot of those minutes. I don't really understand why Mike Sullivan decided to do that. This year, you saw him play Marcus Pettersson most of the time, and that pairing was very, very good, to say the least. So, and in fact, I can try to find the teammates here. He is what he is at this point. I don't mind having him on the team. I think he's great at preventing zone entries. I think he's good at exiting the zone. The only thing I wish is that he just provided more offense. I mean, I hate that the Penguins blue line right now, at least, only has Chris Letang and Mike Matheson as the 2 offensive playmakers. And then there's 4 other players who are basically just defense first players. I think in a perfect world, you want 3 of each. I don't really care what side they're on, but, in my view, I would want 3 offensive distributors from the point and then 3 other players who can, maybe not provide as much offense, but, give it right back defensively with how well they can play in their own zone. That's how I would construct my defensive core, to say the least. But, I think right now the Penguins, it's a little bit of a weird ratio, to say the least, which is why I think, one of these players is probably going to get moved over the offseason. Maybe it's to put POJ up there. Maybe it's to go out and sign a cheaper free agent that's maybe a bit better offensively. I don't know. But with regards to Marino, at least, I would put him out there as trade bait. I would see, what is his value around the league? Do some GMs see a lot of upside in this player because he's only played 3 full seasons in the NHL. He's still relatively young, in his early 20s. I'm curious to see here, what, and if that was a little noisy there, my dryer decided to go off right as I'm finishing my segment here. So that's just that's perfect timing. But, that's the big kicker here. What is his value around the league? I think they can honestly get a forward back for him, probably that can play in the top 9. Remember, Vancouver was discussing him around the trade deadline, I'm pretty sure. And I think they weren't really willing to give. I think they were potentially willing to give back a forward, but I think the Penguins were kind of like, we don't want to give up a player that can really help us right now. I mean, sure, they did that with Zach Aston Reese, and they did that with Dominic Simone, but those are also 2 bottom 6 forwards. But I don't think they really wanted to give up a top 4 defenseman, especially with Chris Letang potentially out of the door. So I thought they made the right call to keep him. I would shop him though, but if you're not getting what you want to get from him, just probably a forward, you can pull back, go into next season with him as the second right-handed defenseman. And I think that's perfectly fine. I think he showed enough this season that he can still play. And, he's still mostly fine on the blue line. Again, I want more offense from him, but at this point, I'm not really holding my breath, to say the least. So that wraps up this first segment of the Locked On Penguins podcast. Coming up in the second segment, we're going to get into the Stanley Cup final and that interesting Jack Johnson story that I saw on The Athletic. But before we get to that, our friends at Build are always coming out with amazing new flavors. Well, this time Build has truly outdone themselves with their new Mud Pie flavor. And for the first time ever, Build is introducing the new Mud Pie flavor in both Mud Pie Bar and Mud Pie Puff. Not sure what mud pie tastes like? Well, if you're a chocolate fan, you better sit down for this. The new mud pie bar is rich whipped cream and chocolate mousse smothered in 100% real chocolate, and it's topped with cookies and cream crumble. You've got to try the mud pie as soon as possible, and you need to hurry because the mud pie bar and the mud pie puff are only available for a limited time. You can visit built.com to taste the deliciousness for yourself, and if you're not convinced, luckily we save the best for last. It's actually good for you. And no, seriously, all Built products are low calories, high protein, and low sugar. Mud pie is packed with 16 grams of protein and only 150 calories and 8 grams of sugar. It's like your mom baked the most deliciously creamy chocolate mud pie and wrapped it up just for you. They're available at built.com right now, but they're going fast because they are delicious. You can go to built.com, use promo code LOCK15 and get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am your host, Hunter Hodes. You want to follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. You can also follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. Okay, so again, this is probably the first time in over a year that I am going to discuss the infamous Jack Johnson contract and the player, of course, that is Jack Johnson. So Josh Odia of The Athletic wrote a pretty cool story this morning, about Johnson, his time in Pittsburgh, talk to Jim Rutherford, and all that stuff. If I can just find this here on my Twitter. And Josh basically just writes in his story, I hope he wins the cup, and then he calls it a career. And he had some interesting information about Johnson in this story. And, he's right about this. They gave Johnson a 5-year contract. They were under no obligation to do so. There was no bidding war. He was viewed around the league as a declining player whose underlying numbers would undermine a team's championship hopes more than augment them. He says, I've spoken with Rutherford at times about the contract. To this day, he still doesn't regret it. Shocker. I know. I'm not shocked at that. And Rutherford even said to him he could still play, could still kill penalties and help a team win. And he is a character guy. And of course, that's what he says. But this is the big kicker here in Josh's story. I truly believe that Rutherford felt like he was being something of a father figure to Johnson based on what happened. He surely was aware that other teams were knocking down Johnson's door with long-term offers. He then goes to say, my belief is that Johnson wanted to set him up for life. My belief is Rutherford wanted to set Johnson up for life, to make sure he was taken care of. It's not every day that a pro athlete loses most of his money to his parents. The whole story, you can find that story by Aaron Portzline on The Athletic, or just do a couple Google searches and stuff. It's actually a very sad story in all seriousness. I know people joke about it on social media, especially when he was here, but in all seriousness, that is a very sad story, and his parents just totally, screwed him over. That's the nice way of saying it. I'm not going to cuss on this podcast here, but that's the nice way of putting it, to say the least. And, I think the biggest thing of Johnson's tenure, and I said this when I started the podcast, I think he was really only here when I was really first starting out the show. And of course they bought him out, and that was probably one of the greatest days in the show's history. But, I gave him a chance because, hey, I've ate crow plenty of times. I'm willing to do that again. But, sure enough, what I thought was going to happen came to pass, and he was not good. And sadly, a lot of us, fans, other media members saw this coming. But the biggest thing about the Johnson era in Pittsburgh was the lies that people told to the fan base. And what I mean by people, I mean by certain media members. It was not one or two people in the city of Pittsburgh that were doing it. It was multiple. And they would always be, they would either just try to be a contrarian for the sake of doing that, access journalism, Jim Rutherford being able to, they don't want to lose, talking to Jim Rutherford and all this other stuff. And at the end of the day, I guess shilling is probably the best word for it. And it wasn't like a committee was formed to be like the Jack Johnson, the defending committee, but it was a bit weird how, and I'm not going to name names here. I'm not like that kind of person, but it was more than one or two media members in this city that would always defend him, defend Jim Rutherford, say it was a good signing, but yet eye test and analytics wise, he stunk. There was no reason to give him that 5-year term. And by all accounts, he is a great guy. on and off the ice. He's probably a very nice dude. I've heard nothing but great stories about him. But at the end of the day, the Penguins screwed themselves by signing him. He was that freaking bad in the return to play series against the Montreal Canadiens when he had depth players basically just owning him on a nightly basis in that series. Literally, his pairing with Justin Schultz was one of the worst pairings I think I've ever seen in a playoff series. I'm not even joking there. It was the two other pairings at that time, Dumoulin, Letang, pretty sure it was Pedersen, Marino. They were fine. But otherwise, that pairing, every time they were on the ice, it was either a scoring chance against or a goal was in the back of their net. And, sure, you can also put it on Mike Sullivan, for icing that pairing. And, you definitely can, because there's probably no reason for either of those two players to be playing. But you can also fault the general manager for, just signing A, Schultz to, that kind of extension, and also B, Johnson to that contract. And, Rutherford's tenure here was always very weird. Had a great 18-month stretch where he was killing it. And then after that, just totally barfed all over himself, including with the Johnson signing. And, then he just quit on the franchise. I think at the end of the day, that's really what you can say about him. And the Penguins, they're still paying for it with that Johnson contract. They had to buy that. They had to buy him out. And it's going to be at least the next couple of years until he is off their payroll. It's funny. The Penguins are paying him right now to be in the Stanley Cup final. That's how pathetic it is. And again, I hope, honestly, he's the first guy to get the cup if Colorado wins. I hope when Nathan MacKinnon gets it, if the Avs win, he skates it right up to Jack Johnson, be like, hey, man, here's the Stanley Cup. And I hope he skates it around the ice and just looks like the happiest kid on earth. I truly hope for that. I'm not even being facetious here. It would be pretty cool. And I would love to see just what the Yinzers in this city say. Excuse me, just what they say either in person with each other or on social media, because it would be truly hilarious. And I think my buddy J_155 Jason, and I've shouted him out numerous times on this podcast. He has done an incredible job with explaining the Jack Johnson situation. And, he had a great thread on it on his Twitter today. And as I just said, Jack Johnson is a good person, but, we still can't ignore the propaganda campaign justifying the acquisition and then telling everyone like, oh my God, you don't know what you're talking about. You're just a stupid fan who you just look at the numbers. You don't know him as like an actual person, character guy. He's going to blow you all away and all this other stuff. But again, what I thought was going to happen came to pass, and he stunk. And at the end of the day, a lot of the very vocal majority of the fans were right. Now, should he have been the scapegoat on everything? Absolutely not. But the people that would always rush to defend him, every time like a goal was scored against the Penguins, even when he was not on the ice, I would see media members, just be smart butts and just be like, oh, Jack Johnson's fault. Oh, hey, this is Jack Johnson's fault, right? I'm like, you guys don't have to be just fools for the sake of being fools. I mean, the people that were in that category only give out criticism when it's warranted. And I felt like when he did screw up, which was pretty often, I thought, he deserved it. And, I'm not going to fault someone like Johnson for taking that kind of contract. I mean, 5 years, $3.5 million. Who wouldn't take that contract? But it was still an egregious move that really screwed over the Penguins for, at least 2 full seasons. I mean, at the end of the day, Sid and Gino were still a lot younger at that time. They could have really went all in and maybe gotten some, better players to come in, especially on the defensive side of the puck and, also forward wise. But, they had a GM that was just basically throwing stuff at the wall and hoping that it stuck. And, this was one of them, and it didn't work out for him. But at the end of the day, I'm glad the Avalanche are in the Stanley Cup final. And I do wish for Jack Johnson to, walk off into the sunset here, win the cup, call it a career. I mean, I think that's really what he's missing at this point. And, the only reason he's in the lineup is because Sam Girard is not playing. But, I still wish the best for him. And I do think he is a good person. So that wraps up this second segment of today's episode. Coming up in the third segment, I'm going to get into something that I listened to on DK's Daily Shot of the Penguins of DK Pittsburgh Sports. It was one of his just J1Qs that he runs, and it was an interesting topic that there's a potential free agent that the Penguins could be going after. So I'm going to get to my thoughts on that and whether the Penguins should sign him coming up here in this next segment. All right, I'm back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am your host, Hunter Hodes. Remember to follow me on Twitter, Hunter Hodes. You can also follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. So I was listening to DK's Daily Shot. This was on Tuesday, Wednesday morning, and someone asked DK, what free agent are you looking for the Penguins to go after? And he always says he loves getting that question, but he threw out the name, and if you listen to it, you probably already know, but if you didn't, I'll throw out the name right now. He said he wouldn't be surprised if the Penguins go out and get Zach Aston Reese again. And he said it's because Mike Sullivan absolutely loves him. He said Ron Hextall absolutely loves him. And, it sounds like they never really wanted to give him up. I almost lost my train of thought when they were getting the Rickard Rakell trade, but the Rickard Rakell deal, excuse me. But that's the price you pay when you want to go out and get a top 6 to top 9 winger. But DK says he'll be cheap, and he might be right. I would say with that because he doesn't bring a lot of offense. He came over to Anaheim, played in 17 games. Doubled up his goal total. 2 goals in 17 games, only 1 goal in 52 games for the Penguins this season. Underlying numbers when he went over to Anaheim, when he was on the ice, the Ducks had 46% of the shot attempts. But basically break even in actual goals, 4 goals against, 48% of the expected goals. Scoring chances got caved in a little bit, 45.6% of those. High danger chances, though, he broke even, 50.6%, and he was only on the ice for 2 high danger goals against. So defensively, he is still a rock for them. And, he would be cheap. At the end of the day, you could probably get him for $1 million to 1.5. But, I kind of want fresh blood in from another team. I mean, sure, it would make sense because he is one of their best penalty killers. Nothing really happens in the defensive zone when he is on the ice. But offensively, he just doesn't do enough for me to justify bringing him back. And, at the end of the day, if they do bring him back, I'm not going to be super upset about that. I'll just be like, well, I kind of saw it coming, especially with talking about it on the podcast and listening to it on DK's Daily Shot. But I still feel like you can get bargain level contracts for, good defensive players and someone who can provide a little more offense for maybe a little more than, 1.5. I think the Penguins would have the cap space to, give out like a 1 year, $2 to $2.1 million contract to someone in free agency. But, I'm not surprised to hear that Sullivan does love Aston Reese. I mean, he would always, ice him in pretty big situations down the stretch in games. Remember last year against the Islanders in the playoffs, right? When the Penguins were trying to ice a game, Aston Reese, Bluger, Tanev go out, feed them to the Wolves, and they wouldn't usually do their job. They were probably, I would say, arguably the best fourth line in hockey. After he did leave the team, I will say the penalty kill did struggle, so he would be a good asset back there. And, forward line wise, I mean, I would probably have him in the lineup over someone like Brian Boyle. I think that would be perfectly fine, in my opinion. But, with Boyle being a UFA and with other players being UFAs as well in the bottom 6, I feel like the team can and they should do better. But, this is Ron Hextall we're talking about here. So at the end of the day, he always loves going after people he knows. He even said he thanked Aston Reese for being a great Penguin. He also said he didn't really want to deal him in the deal, but again, that's the price you pay when you're in a win now mode. He is a UFA, so he can sign anywhere he wants. But how much he loved being a Penguin, I think, and how much I think again he's loved by everyone I think on this team, would not be surprised if he takes a hometown discount to come back here. Maybe you can put him back on the fourth line with Bluger and McGinn if McGinn is back too. You figure out what you can do on the third line if Kapanen doesn't come back. Maybe you re-sign Heinen, Rodriguez. all those guys. And, if your top 6 is something like Gensel, Crosby, Rust, Malkin with, I don't know, Zucker, another winger, and maybe a different winger on Malkin's line, and you have a third line of, Heinen, Rodriguez, and Carter, and then maybe your fourth line is Aston Reese, Bluger, McGinn. I almost botched Brock McGinn's name. That's still a pretty deep team, but, I still want to see them make changes to that third line. So, his underlines, they weren't overly terrible, even with the Penguins this year. Right around 50% in shot attempts when he was on the ice, 60% of the actual goals for the Penguins, 51% of the high danger chances for. He was on the ice for 9 high danger goals against in 52 games. I mean, those are pretty good numbers, to say the least. So let me know, what do you all think of a potential Aston Reese reunion? Would you bring him back? If you would, what kind of contract would you sign up to? Let me know in the comments. You can DM me on social media, all of that. So that will do it for this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I again appreciate every one of you listening to the show, and I'll be back on Friday with another episode of this podcast. For Monday and Tuesday next week, I won't be in my normal house. I'm taking a vacation with my family to Florida for a few days, so you all will get a nice view for the video portion of the episodes, at least to start the week. But again, that will do it for this episode. Appreciate all of you listening to this one, and I'll be back with another episode on Friday.